Have you ever walked into a room that just felt right? You know the kind I mean. The one where the air itself seems to settle differently on your skin, where your shoulders drop without you even realizing it, and suddenly you're not just standing in a space, but being gently embraced by it. Maybe it was a friend's living room you visited last weekend, the kind where the light catches the edge of an old wooden console just so. Or that boutique hotel you stayed in during your last trip, the one that made you linger in the doorway a second longer than necessary because everything simply felt expensive and timeless. Then you come home to your own place and something feels off. The room looks fine on paper. Furniture is there. Colors match. Maybe you even spent a little extra on that accent chair. But it still lands flat, almost cheap. Like a stage set that never quite convinces the eye. You tell yourself it's because you don't have the budget for designer pieces, or that your taste just isn't refined enough. But here's what's really happening. Your brain is quietly starving for something most people never even notice, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Today I'm going to show you the hidden psychology that separates rooms that feel warm and expensive from those that feel cold and sterile. And the beautiful part is, you don't need to buy a single new thing to fix it. You just need to understand how your mind is reading the space around you, and then give it exactly what it's craving. Let me show you. Think about the last time you stepped into a living room that felt instantly disappointing, even though nothing was technically wrong with it. The sofa sits squarely against the wall. The coffee table lines up perfectly in front. The TV console matches the height of everything else. And the whole thing just sits there in one flat layer like a photograph that forgot to breathe. That, my friend, is what I call the single plane trap. And it's the silent killer of almost every ordinary room. Your brain evolved to navigate three-dimensional landscapes. Forests with layered trees, mountains fading into hazy distance, rivers winding through foreground rocks. So when it walks into a modern interior that collapses everything onto one vertical plane, it panics just a little. Neurologically, your eyes scan in that familiar W or M pattern we all do unconsciously, hunting for depth cues the way our ancestors scanned for predators or prey. But if every major piece of furniture lives at roughly the same height, say between 3 and 4 feet off the floor, your eye has nowhere to travel vertically. The brain registers this as a two-dimensional cutout, a dollhouse effect that tricks you into feeling like the room is smaller, cheaper, and somehow less real. It's not your furniture's fault. It's an optical illusion rooted deep in how the visual cortex processes spatial information. Imagine walking into a child's playhouse where the furniture is glued to the back wall at eye level. Cute for a toy, but in real life it creates this subtle unease. This sense that the space is compressed, sanitized, and lacking the rich dimensionality your mind expects from a place meant for living. Let me paint the picture even more vividly for you. Picture yourself entering that flat room again. Your gaze lands on the sofa, then glides horizontally across to the matching side table, then to the lamp that sits exactly at the same elevation, and finally to the television mounted at the same plane. There's no foreground pulling you in, no middle ground inviting your eye to pause, and certainly no background lifting your spirit upward. The room feels like a catalog page, perfectly arranged but emotionally inert. Now contrast that with a room that escapes the trap. Here, your eye is coaxed upward by a tall bookcase that stretches toward the ceiling, then drawn back down by a low sculptural coffee table, floating a few inches off the rug, and then lifted again by curtains that brush near the crown molding. The brain receives constant proof of depth, and suddenly the space feels expansive, luxurious, almost alive. This isn't magic, it's evolutionary psychology meeting deliberate design. Our ancestors needed to judge distance and safety quickly. Foreground details for immediate threats, middle ground elements for navigation, background layers for long-term horizon awareness. When a room denies those layers, your nervous system subtly registers it as unsafe or incomplete, which is why even expensive furniture in a single plane layout can still feel cheap. The dollhouse effect is particularly insidious because it's invisible to the untrained eye. You might blame the color or the size of the room, but the real culprit is this collapsed dimensionality that starves your visual cortex of the vertical journey it craves. Now let's move from diagnosis to the first powerful reclamation: how to give your room back its vertical rhythm and trigger what I call the lofting effect. The cheat code here is so simple yet transformative that once you try it, you'll wonder how you ever lived without it. Take your curtain rods. Most people mount them right at the top of the window frame, which is the single biggest mistake that keeps ceilings feeling low and rooms feeling boxed in. Instead, raise that rod 2 to 4 inches below the ceiling itself, or even flush if your architecture allows. What happens next is pure optical psychology. Your brain, wired to complete incomplete patterns, automatically fills in the missing height and perceives the entire wall as taller. It's the same illusion that makes vertical stripes on clothing elongate the body. Your eye follows the line upward and assumes greater dimension than is literally there. Suddenly, the room breathes. Add a couple of tall, slender floor lamps, or a narrow bookcase that reaches at least 75% of the way to the ceiling, and you've created what designers quietly call vertical rhythm, a deliberate up and down cadence that guides your gaze in that natural W pattern, preventing the eye from stalling in the middle of the room like a bored tourist. Think about it this way: the brain loves movement, not stasis. When your eye is invited to travel vertically, it registers spaciousness even in modest square footage. I can't conclude this section without mentioning how this single change affects your nervous system on a deeper level. You'll feel it the moment you walk in: a subtle lift in mood, a sense of possibility, because the room is no longer pressing down on you but lifting you up. And the best part? It costs almost nothing. Just a longer curtain rod, a drill, and 10 minutes of your time. But vertical rhythm is only half the story. To truly escape the flatness, you also need to master depth on the horizontal plane. And that begins with the art of floating your furniture. Here's what's really happening when you pull your sofa even 6 inches away from the wall. You create what I call a shadow line, a thin dark sliver that acts as visual proof of three-dimensionality. Your brain instantly registers negative space as intentional depth rather than wasted area, and the room expands in perceived size by 20 to 30%. It's the same principle landscape painters have used for centuries. Foreground elements like a low coffee table, middle ground layers such as a console table placed slightly behind and to the side, and background anchors like a tall plant or artwork that recedes gently. Without these layers, everything collides into one visual plane, and your eye has no reason to linger or explore. Imagine the transformation. Before, the sofa hugged the wall like it was afraid of the floor. After, it floats with confidence, casting a soft shadow that sculpts the space and invites your body to move around it more freely. You feel the room breathe, because negative space is no longer emptiness, it's purposeful pause. The visual equivalent of a well-timed rest in music. Layer in a rug that stops short of the walls by 8 to 12 inches, and suddenly the floor itself becomes part of the composition, guiding your eye in gentle circles rather than straight, boring lines. The psychological payoff is enormous. Where once the room felt like a waiting area, now it feels like a sanctuary you want to inhabit. Your brain receives constant micro-cues of depth. Shadows under the sofa legs, the way light grazes the edge of the coffee table, and rewards you with that expensive, timeless feeling that has nothing to do with price tags and everything to do with how expertly you've fed its hunger for dimensionality. Let me linger here for a moment, because this horizontal layering is where most people stop short and wonder why their efforts still fall flat. The key is hierarchy of objects: tall, medium, and low elements working in concert. Place a tall floor lamp in the corner behind the floating sofa, so its light pools downward, creating vertical drama. Then add a medium-height console against the adjacent wall with a low stack of books and a single sculptural object on top. Finally, the coffee table in the foreground stays deliberately low, maybe 18 inches at most, so your eye is pulled forward and then lifted again. The brain processes this as a complete landscape, and the emotional shift is immediate. You feel grounded, yet elevated, contained, yet expansive. It's the difference between a room that feels like it's holding its breath and one that exhales luxury with every glance. And once you experience it, you'll start seeing single-plane traps everywhere, in friends' homes, in model apartments, even in your own before photos. But now you know the fix, and that knowledge is pure empowerment. Of course, no amount of clever furniture placement can save a room if the lighting is wrong. And this is where the psychology gets even more fascinating. Uniform overhead light, the kind most homes rely on with recessed cans or a single ceiling fixture, is the fastest way to kill soul. Why? Because your brain evolved under the ever-changing directional light of the sun and fire, where shadows weren't enemies but constructive tools that sculpt, form, and create depth. When light comes from every direction at once, like on a cloudy day, the visual system loses its ability to read texture and dimension. Everything flattens into a dull, even plane. Contrast that with the golden hour of sunset, when light grazes at a low 45-degree angle, and suddenly every surface comes alive. Fabric gains dimension, wood grain pops, and the room feels rich with narrative. That's why the pros obsess over 3 distinct layers of lighting. The mood layer. Soft, ambient sources like table lamps that set emotional temperature. The task layer. Focused beams for reading or cooking. And the accent layer. Precise highlights that draw attention to beautiful objects or architectural details. The terminator line. The crisp edge where light meets shadow, is your secret weapon here. Position a floor lamp beside your reading chair, so it casts a gentle grazing light across the wall behind you. The shadow it creates adds mass and presence to the furniture, making the whole room feel more substantial. Or try sconces mounted at eye level on either side of a headboard. The 45-degree side light they throw across pillows and artwork creates that theater-like drama that instantly signals luxury. Think about it this way. Uniform light tells your brain, this space is sterile and safe but boring, while layered directional light whispers, something interesting is happening here. The emotional benefit is profound. You'll notice yourself lingering longer, feeling calmer, more inspired, because your nervous system finally recognizes the room as a place of life rather than a showroom. Let's go deeper into the lighting psychology, because this is where the real transformation happens for most people. Imagine walking into your living room at dusk with only the mood layer on, 2 warm table lamps, throwing pools of golden light onto the floating sofa and the textured rug beneath it. The shadows between those pools become negative space that breathes, and suddenly the room feels intimate yet grand, cozy yet sophisticated. Now flip on the overhead cans and watch the magic evaporate. Every surface flattens. The beautiful depth you worked so hard to create disappears, and the space reverts to feeling flat and cheap again. That's not imagination, it's neurology. Your retina and visual cortex are hardwired to detect contrast and gradient. When light is even, contrast vanishes, and with it goes the perception of quality. The pro move here is to install dimmers on every single light source. Cheap, easy, and non-negotiable. Then experiment with 2,700 Kelvin bulbs for that candle-like warmth that makes skin and materials look their most expensive. Add a small uplight behind a tall plant in the corner, so its leaves cast dramatic shadows on the ceiling, creating what feels like an architectural feature that wasn't there before. The room gains phantom height and soul in equal measure. I've seen clients transform their entire sense of home simply by swapping one harsh overhead light for 3 thoughtfully placed lamps, and the psychological shift is remarkable. Anxiety around entertaining drops. Creativity flows more freely. Even sleep improves because the evening light signals the brain that the day is gently winding down rather than being abruptly shut off. But here's where things get really interesting. Once you've reclaimed vertical and horizontal planes and mastered lighting, you still have to confront the symmetry trap, that quietly sterilizes so many otherwise beautiful rooms. Our brains adore perfect balance because it signals safety and order. It's the evolutionary leftover from preferring symmetrical faces and balanced landscapes that promise no hidden dangers. In a home, however, too much symmetry reads as catalog-like, lifeless, almost institutional. That's why the 3-5-7 rule becomes your next essential tool. Every vignette or styling moment should feature one tall element, one medium, and one low, or 3 objects of varying heights grouped in an odd-numbered cluster. On your bookshelf, for example, avoid lining up books like soldiers at attention. Instead, place a tall sculpture on the left, a medium stack of horizontally stacked books in the center, and a low organic ceramic bowl on the right. The eye dances between the heights, and the brain registers organic energy rather than rigid control. The same applies to your console table. A tall lamp on one end, a medium-framed photo slightly off-center, and a low trailing plant on the other. Odd numbers create visual tension that feels alive. Even numbers create visual equilibrium that feels dead. Think about it this way. The brain is constantly scanning for patterns, and perfect symmetry is a pattern it solves instantly and then ignores. Asymmetry with hierarchy keeps the mind engaged, curious, and emotionally invested in the space. The result is a room that feels curated by a real person rather than a furniture store algorithm. Let me expand on this because the symmetry trap is so seductive and so damaging. You walk into a perfectly mirrored living room, 2 identical lamps flanking a centered artwork, 2 matching chairs opposite each other, 2 side tables at exact distances, and on the surface it looks designed. But after 5 minutes the energy drains away, and you feel the subtle sterility creeping in. That's because your brain, while comforted by the balance, is also bored by the lack of narrative friction. Rooms that feel expensive and timeless always have that gentle push-pull of asymmetry within an overall sense of order. It's the 80-20 rule of soul at work. 80% of the room obeys visual logic. 20% breaks it in intentional human ways. And that brings us to the sanitization trap, the final, often overlooked reason good rooms still feel cold. When everything is too perfect, too new, too matchy, the brain receives no proof of human presence. Evolution taught us to trust spaces that show gentle wear, layered stories, and the beautiful friction of mixed eras. A dented brass tray from a flea market placed beside a sleek modern lamp. A vintage textile thrown over a contemporary sofa. These small imperfections signal a real person lives here and has lived fully. The sanitization trap happens when we over-edit our homes into Instagram perfection, stripping away the very details that make the brain relax and claim the space as its own. The emotional cost is huge. The room may photograph well but feels emotionally unavailable, like a beautiful stranger you admire but never quite connect with. The 80-20 rule of curation is your liberation here. 80% of your choices should follow the principles we've covered: vertical rhythm, layered depth, directional light, 357 hierarchy. That crucial 20% is where you inject soul through deliberate imperfection. Maybe it's a slightly chipped ceramic vase you love despite its flaw, or a mismatched pair of candlesticks from 2 different decades, or a painting hung just a touch off-center because the light hits it better that way. Your brain recognizes these as evidence of life, and the room transforms from a showroom into a sanctuary. I've watched people weep with recognition when they finally allow this friction in, the moment they stop trying to make everything right and start making it true. The psychological benefit is profound. You feel seen by your own home, and your home feels alive in return. Suddenly, the space doesn't just look expensive. It feels like an extension of your own rich, imperfect humanity. As we draw toward the end of this journey together, let me bring it all full circle. Your brain is constantly searching for proof of life, depth that invites exploration, shadows that sculpt reality, vertical journeys that lift the spirit, horizontal layers that create breathing room. directional light that adds drama, gentle symmetry that sparks energy, and just enough imperfection to confirm a human hand has been here. When you give it those things, even with the exact same furniture you already own, the room stops feeling flat and cheap and starts radiating that warm, expensive, timeless quality you've always wanted. You don't need a bigger budget or better taste. You need this deeper understanding of the psychology at play, and now you have it. Walk into your living room right now and try one single change. Raise those curtains. Float that sofa. Swap the overhead light for a lamp, and watch how quickly your nervous system responds with a sigh of relief and delight. You'll feel smarter, more capable, and genuinely excited to live in your own space again. A home should feel like a person actually lives there, breathing, evolving, layered with stories both grand and small. When you understand the hidden psychology we've explored today, you become the quiet architect of that feeling, and the transformation is nothing short of magical. In the next piece, we'll go deeper into how to apply this exact psychology to your kitchen, so it feels like the warmest room in the house, the true heart where memories are made, and every detail whispers welcome home. Until then, trust what your eye and your heart are telling you. The most beautiful room you'll ever create is the one that finally feels right because it finally feels real.